Hello and welcome to the Mindful Coach Podcast. And I'm your host, Brett Hill. I'm a mindful somatic coach and founder of the Mindful Coach Association. I meet a lot of coaches working with the Mindful Coach Association. I'm so inspired by their stories and the courageous work that they're doing that I created this podcast so you can hear them too. If you're aligned with this work, then join us at themindfulcoachassociation.com, where you can list your services for absolutely free and receive invitations to community meetings where you can network and meet your colleagues. We hope you'll join us. And now, the Mindful Coach Podcast. So welcome to this edition of the Mindful Coach Podcast. I can't tell you how excited I am to have as a guest in the show I don't know how to describe this guy. There's so many adjectives. An amazing character, hysterical, funny, educated, brilliant, insightful, creative, entrepreneurial. I mean, this guy is Mark Leonard is who I'm talking about. And let me just tell you a little bit about this and strap in for this because this is something. Okay, Mark's really quite a character, and I can't tell you how excited I am to have him here. Mark is a sustainability practitioner. So it starts with that. And like, where have you ever even heard that? And it comes from his insights that everything that we're doing in policy and governance and regulation and enforcement was not creating a sustainable future for human beings on the planet. He felt that there was a chance that making aspects of Buddhist insight and practice accessible to a larger audience had the chance of creating the systemic change that we need to facilitate sustainability. And this insight that it was a systemic issue led him on a path to create and establish one of the co-creators of the Oxford Mindfulness Center. And then doing that, he adapted MBCT therapy, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, to a workplace training. Now, in endeavoring to take that training and deliver it, he had a key insight himself, an observation that the social interactions in that group were as powerful or more powerful in helping the participants engage in learning mindfulness than the training itself. And and that obviously requires some adaptation, some revisiting the entire framework for delivering this training. And so in doing that, he created the mindfulness-based organizational education to focus on these new insights and developed a training that has been formally recognized by the British and Dutch Mindfulness Teachers Association as the very first to practice and embrace short guided meditations. Now, this mindfulness-based organizational education, we'll call it Mboe sometimes in this podcast, is evidence-based from trials that they ran with the National Health Service with the hospital staff, and the results were published in a peer-reviewed journal, Mindfulness. Now he's working on building an international team to help promote the mindfulness-based education practices, policies, and the message. So welcome to the show, Mark Leonard. So happy to have you here. Did I get that right?
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. Thank you, Brett, so much. And I'm kind of calling the theoretical framework, if you like, social mindfulness.
Yes.
And the course itself is is Mboe. So it's a specific course. You know, it means that the theory of social mindfulness is that mindfulness is, as Evan Thompson described it in a keynote, his closing keynote speech, or closing keynote for the International Symposium on Cognitive Science, I think it is, in 2016. He said, mindfulness is a social embodied process, or he now says it's social embodied mindfulness. And Evan Thompson was one of the co-authors of the seminal book, the Embodied Mind by Francisco Varela, now published in the same year as Jon Kabat-Zinn's Full Catastrophe Living.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
And so we know how that ran in terms of mindful. Jon Kabat-Zinn, his work is so mainstream, but still today in my own work, I'm deeply aligned with your ideas around social mindfulness. In my own coach training, I help coaches learn mindfulness in relationship to their clients, and then help their clients learn mindfulness in relationship to their world. So I'm very much aligned with that. And I'm curious, what's your experience with the notion of social mindfulness in contrast to what you might call the Jon Kabat-Zinn approach, or if there is such a thing as the Jon Kabat-Zinn approach, but what you might call traditional mindfulness training?
Well, I think, it's generally assumed, there's this very beautiful structure that Jon Kabat-Zinn came up with, and it's clearly has had, has all sorts of benefits for a number of people, and this has been adapted and trialed, and there are now, well, I don't know how many hundreds of trials have been carried out, and beneficial outcomes have been published on the benefits of the sort of standard 8-week format with that's sometimes described as a semi-intensive meditation training or an intensive meditation training. It asks about 60 hours of meditation, mindfulness meditation over 8 weeks. So that's the standard kind of thinking, that this amount of mindfulness meditation has this effect.
Yeah, exactly. Uh-huh.
And I guess my view is that it's more about context, it's interactions, it's expectations, it's much more sophisticated. I mean, when somebody comes into, a therapy, that, a therapeutic environment, they have all sorts of expectations and assumptions about how that's going to work out. Mm-hmm. And I think these are, really have a really powerful influence. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to help people deal with chronic pain and stress and depression and stuff, but from my point of view, these chronic stress, depression, anxiety, these are really symptoms of a deeper problem. And I'm starting from a point where the first thing that I recognize is that stress, depression, anxiety are normal human responses to a maladapted society, to an experience that drives people to do this. In the UK, 25% of people, this is 2014 figures, so we're going back nearly a decade. 25% of the population are said to have, present with a diagnosable mental health problem. There's something wrong there. If 25% are presenting with that kind of level of, mental health problems in society, we're talking like 75%, 80% of people are the walking wounded. Or, the rest, a huge proportion of the rest of the people are walking wounded. People are coping at the moment. So, the key idea is that we're going to try and use mindfulness to understand what's going wrong, not just in our own experience, but how we can use mindfulness to work together, to understand each other, to work together to change the conditions, the social conditions, change the way our lives work collectively, to come up with ways of solving this deeper systemic crisis, another aspect of which is the way we are driving ourselves to, what is, in geological time, pretty rapid extinction. Okay. I mean, it may, if we go on the way we are going, there's going to be billions who are going to die very unpleasant deaths this century.
Yeah. So and this ought to be, you would think, some kind of a wake-up call.
Yeah.
And so what do you think, though? Like, how do you get people to snap to the truth of their experience?
Well, as I said, I mean, as you said in the introduction, your lovely introduction there, it's like I came to the conclusion that it was social interactions that were maybe having more impact than the actual mindfulness meditations themselves. And someone was recommended to me many years ago by a great friend of mine who is also, a bit of a radical in the Buddhist world within the Triratna order. he recommended me to read The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist, which is, if you haven't come across it, it's a must read, or at least check out some of his talks on
Okay. We'll put a link to it in the show notes.
On YouTube, and he explains how the different two hemispheres of the brain are evolved in different ways, and if you like, we're in a continual conversation with these two hemispheres. One is grasping and defining, and the other is open, context dependent, sees the whole. The left sees the parts, and it controls our right hand. We grab things with it, and the right side of the right hemisphere is kind of open awareness, contextual. It's not linguistic in the same way that the left side of the brain. When we say we grasp something conceptually, that's literally to do with the fact that the left side of the left hemisphere controls the right hand, and we use the right hand to grasp things. Okay. Anyway, I've only got a couple of 100 pages in, but I got to, I was just reading a couple of days. I mean, it's a great big fat book. I'm a bit slow at reading anyway, but because I'm a little bit dyslexic, but it's just like, did you know that focus? It comes from a root word, or the meaning of the word focus from its Latin origins is hearth. So we're talking about hearth, yeah. We're talking about focus of attention all the time, right?
Right, of course. I mean, that's the whole practice to begin with, is attention training. Watch your thoughts, come back to awareness. Watch your thoughts, come back to awareness.
Or pay attention to the sensations in the body of the breath or whatever, and come back to that. And what's happening with, what does hearth do? Socially, we sit round the fire. We're looking at the fire, but we're feeling part of a group. It's in the evening, we're relaxing, and that is all that, for a long time, I've used that analogy to describe what we're trying to do with mindfulness practice, is become able to reproduce that mind state, that physiological state of calmness and awareness that is produced when we would have, in our evolution, would have sat round the fire, looking at the flames, telling stories, feeling safe within an intimate group of people that we trust, know, love, have lifelong caring relationships with. And we're having to learn to do that in society today, because we've lost the social structures, the social structures that would have satisfied our social and emotional needs in our evolution, that would reduce this mind state naturally. That's why it's a natural. That's what, when we're talking about mindfulness as a mind state, that's why we're talking about it as a natural thing, because that's how we evolved, and we've just become more and more absorbed in this, controlling, grasping, organizing, self-improving functions of the left hemisphere, and we've become our capacity to switch attention from left hemisphere functioning to right hemisphere functioning has become terribly impaired, and we've got to go back to that. We've got the systemic problems are largely because every time we do something, we see it out of context, and there are unintended consequences. So we've got to somehow see the whole and change out the way we interact with things to feel the whole. We can never conceptualize the whole. It's beyond our conception. We can just feel the whole. And from a Buddhist point of view, this is about going back to intentionality. It's like, what is our deeper intention? Is it essentially compassionate? Is it essentially seeking the greatest good? Is it essentially seeking, an outcome that is going to be wholesome? And that's very hard to define what those things are. And we have to adapt, do one thing, we get it wrong. Okay, that's made a mistake. How do we can never get it absolutely. We can never conceive of a series of actions that are going to produce that result, because they're always only a very limited snapshot picture. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm rambling on there, but that's the broad picture. That's the broad picture. That's what we can do with social mindfulness, because as individuals, we may be able to change our experience and become more, happy, wholesome individuals, and even, have happier, more wholesome relationships. But until we actually come together to work together, as individuals, we've got very little. We're largely disempowered in society. We can do small things, but the kind of things that need to change have to be a movement of change, and that has to be built on the way groups of us work together. And what are the big groups that we have in society today? They're organizations. They're, how do organizations function? How do they engage in business? That is the route I see that offers hope in creating a more sustainable future. Yeah, because of the money involved, etc., the number of people.
So what has to happen? Like, how do you get the attention of those organizations to focus on this, what they're going to see, I imagine, as a non-profit? It's not a profit center for them, so how do you get them to recast themselves in a way where they become agents of sustainability?
Well, I mean, more and more organizations are concerned about sustainability. And it's only maybe 4 or 5 years ago that this whole model of what's called environment and social governance was coming into have an impact in the way that corporates were valued in terms of share value. And that's all about sustainability. It's trying to match share value with a kind of longer term value of an organization to fit into United Nations sustainability goals. And it's linking very much, environmental, sustainability with social sustainability. And we can't, it's recognizing this systemic problem. And I'm saying, I believe we've got to start with the way we understand ourselves and each other to change our sort of whole motivational framework. What feels good? What feels good is when we build trusting, understanding relationships, and we do things together, and we start to care what the outcome is, because it starts to change our time frame from, immediate trying to control things to get immediate results. So there's ESG. That's one thing. Now another thing ESG, environment and social governance, and that's becoming more and more something that is impacting the way corporates are valued. Now, I understand there are all sorts of failures with it and problems with it, like all sorts of things, but it's a step in the right direction. Another issue is to do with well-being. Now, everybody knows that well-being is a problem. Everybody, I don't expect there's a business out there that doesn't realize that time lost to, sickness-related absenteeism or mental health-related absenteeism isn't costing them an awful lot of money. So they're getting to the point where they're realizing that they have to deal with this well-being issues as a matter of business survival, competitiveness. So, but it is very hard for boards to invest in something if they don't have a kind of quantitative measure that they can use to evaluate the impacts of a particular, to look at the return on investment of any particular, intervention and its costing. So there's a really interesting project being started last year in an Oxford group called the World Wellbeing Movement, who are really working towards creating a well-being metric that is widely accepted in the corporate field. So when we get, there are all sorts of ways to measure it, but the point is, in the end, in the end, somebody's got to create a standard, and it's got to be, industry-wide accepted or recognized to be useful for people to use it. So that's another really exciting avenue whereby corporates are going to have to look at beginning to create the tools that make it possible for boards to make financially, sensible decisions about what the cost of a particular thing is and how to measure its value in terms of its outputs. So they can build it into strategy, the strategy and what they do in their organizations. Without that, you're never going to get anywhere, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's so powerful. Now, you have done quite a bit of work in terms of bringing mindfulness training of different kinds and different sorts into organizations. What have you seen firsthand in terms of the impact of that, individually and collectively? Or what's your experience in that?
Okay, so the first big thing that I succeeded in running was when I adapted mindfulness-based cognitive therapy to the workplace. I used the short, the best-selling self-help book version, which is Mindfulness: A Practical Guide to Finding Peace in a Frantic World, written by Professor Mark Williams and Dr. Danny Penman, which was, it was the self-help book that really triggered the explosion in self-help books. And I would guess is probably still, if not the best, it's definitely one of the best self-help books on mindfulness ever written. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to do better than that from a self-help perspective on how to manage stress in everyday stress. Now, I taught this adapted program using this book as a sort of course resource book to staff from the largest corporate provider of veterinary services in the UK. I mean, I think it became the largest corporate provider of veterinary services in Europe, but it had 300 practices across the country. Mm-hmm. And I taught about 30 of these programs. I set up a spin-up company from Oxford, so it was an independent company, but to maintain that sort of connection with Oxford and the kind of direction that it was going in, it was sort of maintaining the provenance of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. So anyway, I taught 30 of these programs. So it was about 10% of the staff of CVS Vets, this corporate mm-hmm. provider of veterinary services. And I was beginning to hear more and more how not just people, obviously, anyone that's taught mindfulness in any context, some people it doesn't work for. We don't know how to get it to work, or we still think it should work, but we don't know how to get it across. But I was getting some remarkable results. We did do a trial which had very good results. It wasn't publishable, but we definitely could see that there were, possibly, it was an indication that there were significant reductions in stress and improvements in mindfulness. But the kind of reports that were coming back, the anecdotal reports, were that the whole culture, the whole atmosphere in veterinary practices was changing as a result of, because they're small practices on the whole, between half a dozen and 25 people. And, 2 or 3 people, maybe people that otherwise that were a bit stressed and reactive and treating people in a way that were, making everybody walk on eggshells, beginning to mm-hmm. change the way that they were responding, reacting, and understanding the impact that was having. And that was changing the whole culture in these veterinary practices, which are, surprisingly enough, incredibly stressful environments. Veterinary surgeons are got 4 times the national average of suicide rates. Wow. For example.
Wow. I mean, who knows that? It's like, that's crazy. I suppose if you step back and think about it, it makes some sense, but I don't think a lot of people do. So thank you for highlighting that.
Yeah. I mean, they have, incredibly pressurized training. They have to have higher grades to get into veterinary school than doctors. They have to learn about all sorts of different animals, not just one. And then they end up running small practices, and they've got very little business training. So they've got no understanding or very little training in terms of social skills. I mean,
right. That's what I was just thinking. Then you have people coming in under extremely stress with their beloved animal who's in life and death situations. Yeah. And then there's the financial aspect of like, can they actually afford? I mean, it's obviously a complete formula for massive stress. Yeah.
And the culture in the industry was that, stress was a kind of badge of honor. And
right.
It was a kind of man up thing.
Exactly.
And the impact of those programs changed the whole way in which stress was regarded in the whole of the veterinary industry in the UK.
Wow.
It was like, we've got to reevaluate this. We've got to think carefully. The veterinary press was changing this attitude towards the man up thing. So it's at a time where it was one of the first sort of big examples of this shift from realizing that this man up thing was not the right way to approach it. That would have been 2012, 13, 14, I did that work. So going back that far, so it had that level of impact in the veterinary profession, and one of the first professions where this shift of recognizing that the man up to stress thing as a badge of honor wasn't the right approach.
Wow, amazing. So you created an entirely different, not entirely different, but a refocused training towards the social aspects of mindfulness. And how does that differ from traditional mindfulness training?
Well, first of all, there's this first shift, which is really, if we're talking about traditional mindfulness training, I think we have to be quite clear about what we mean, because we might be talking about Buddhist mindfulness, which again is a totally different thing. But as we understand it, the mainstream that has most of the research has been done on is this standard 8-week program with 40-minute guided mindfulness meditations every day for 8 weeks. Now, the Frantic Well course I taught to the vets, that was reducing it to 15 minutes a day, 15, 20 minutes, 10, 15, 20 minutes a day. So that's first thing, is reducing it and explaining it much better, and delivering it in a workplace environment. So, an interactive learning process that's familiar with the workplace. So there's a shift in the way it's taught, to be relevant to that context. Okay. So the next step then was to go take those sort of teaching approaches and say, well, what am I really trying to do here? I'm really trying to change the culture in organizations to be more human, to create a well-being, inclusive culture where teams can perform more effectively, to create a psychologically safe environment where that produces well-being, that produces innovation, produces exploration, through creating more of a human environment in those teams. And, I got this amazing opportunity to develop a program specifically to do that for NHS hospital staff. It was a well-being program, but it was recognized that what was important in teams, and this was an orthopedic hospital with surgical teams, high pressure, incredibly complicated work dealing with hip replacements and things like this, and across the organization, that communication was really important in how teams work. So there was an understanding that communication methods, the way people communicated in teams and well-being, were linked to performance and patient outcomes. So we were agreeing that these were our broad brush of objectives. And in the end, the funding came from a charitable source in the hospital, the Royal Orthopaedic Hospital in Birmingham, that funded innovation that was to do with improving, patient outcomes. So we had to justify that. But so I could justify an approach that described social mindfulness or social embodied mindfulness in a way that enabled people to communicate better, to create safer, psychologically safe relationships, understand each other, self-regulate, and use that self-regulation and capacity for cognitive improvement that self-regulation affords, to combine that with interpersonal emotional regulation to create a socially supported mindful environment that could improve the culture and improve performance, improve outcomes.
Wow. So that's what you did and how did that work?
Well, yeah, we did. We managed to organize a trial and we had really good results. Statistically significant reductions in self-reported stress scores, the ones that are widely used in, comparing that with other mindfulness-based interventions used in therapy. We're using the same measures of stress and mindfulness so that we could have a comparison of how effective it was, to compare it with the sort of mainstream mindfulness programs. And we used another measure called Basic Psychological Needs at Work scale that has 3 elements of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And these are recognized as being key elements to human needs in psychological needs in a workplace environment or in any environment. They come from a body of theory called self-determination theory. And we got statistically significant improvements in basic psychological needs at work scale scores as well. This is before and after a 6-week program and in a 1-month follow-up. So, it's kind of like, this is publishable stuff we got.
Right. And you did, in fact, publish
and we got it eventually published. It was published online in 2019 and then, hard copy in the journal Mindfulness in 2020. So, and I don't know of any other mindfulness program that's used that measure either. So.
So now you're involved with trying to get the word out to do this great work in a little bit broader scale. And so this is your mindfulness-based, Mboe, mindfulness-based organizational
education,
yeah. Pardon me, Mboe, and your objective is to. I mean, what's your objective? What are you trying to do with this new framework and this new point of view?
Well, I mean, my vision is a future. A long-term future for humanity, all right?
Wait, no, that's a novel idea.
Yeah.
Let's have a future.
Yeah, I mean, because it doesn't look good.
Yeah, exactly so.
And to be quite honest, I can't be bothered to get out of bed if I think it's all going to go to hell in a handcart. I can't see the point of doing anything while that, my children or my grandchildren are going to go have a very nasty life and a short and unpleasant end. I can't see the point in doing anything in this world apart from trying to create a better future for them and others and future generations. And we're not talking about tens of generations. We're talking about the generations that are alive, that are, that are in their 20s, 30s, 40s.
And I'm with you in the sense that it feels to me like there's a bit of filling while Rome burns going on here. Not a bit, but kind of massively.
Yeah.
And it's like the house is on fire and people are trying to figure out what's on TV. And it's a little bit like, hey, we need to not treat business as usual here. There's an urgency here that matters. Yeah. And so I share that, that that sense of like, why am I doing this work, and why am I talking to you, and why am I trying to promote your work and others, is because I feel like it's imperative. And I don't know another way than to do whatever I can and to help coaches in the world and therapists in the world help people connect to their senses in a way where it becomes actionable. And because your senses are going to tell you what to do if you just pay attention. That's my bias around this thing.
And your senses, we're talking here from a human perspective as being primarily adapted to a social environment. It's our feelings. We're talking about how does it feel? And when we talk about that, we're talking about social emotions.
Yes.
And it's how we relate to those feelings that enables us to build relationships of trust and understanding where we can work together for collective good. And that's the only way we're going to deal with any of these problems. Because at the moment we're disempowered as individuals. We're isolated. We're lonely. We're suffering mental health problems because of the stresses of this isolated life that we experience, all about self-interest.
Yep. I mean, I have another podcast that I do called The Connected Conversation, and it's about mindful communications. And it's a big part of it is, how do we on purpose create connection moment to moment with other people? And not only that, our lives and ourselves. It's like, how do we live in, because our minds are relationally oriented. We only have a sense of ourselves through our experience of the outer world. And we develop this map of what's it like to be me in a body in this space and time.
It's more than our minds, Brett. It's reality. And this is the point. It's helping us understand reality by reclaiming our connectedness. And it's when we it's enabling us to comprehend reality, encounter reality, participate in reality, reclaiming our capacity to participate in reality, to work together to do something about the reality of the situation. So that's the kind of like the theory of how we're going to achieve this sustainable future. So
in your work, in your training, let's say I come to your workshop that you're running. What are you doing in the workshop that I'm not going to find in another, with that kind of a focus and some other kind of a mindfulness? What is your actually? If you can give us an example, perhaps, of maybe one of the exercises or the focuses that you do with your workshops.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because it enables me to answer another question. Well, go back to the question of what am I trying to achieve? I said the vision, but that there are goals here, and the first goal is to change the perception of mindfulness in the world of mindfulness and in wider society, that it's understood as, okay, it's always going to be a stress management thing, but why mindfulness? It's like, why mindfulness? Okay, can help us to cope with stress, can help us to manage stress, but I'm saying mindfulness is much more than that. That today's need is about recreating, using mindfulness to understand how we work as social, emotional, relational beings, to work together to have an impact on the culture of organizations and communities, that empowers organizations and communities to adapt to the changes that we need to make in order to create a sustainable future for mankind and life on Earth. Okay, so how, the next question is, how do you do that? Which is what you're asking. How? Okay. Well, it's like, I kind of told the story already. It's applying a practical approach to explaining how short mindfulness meditation practices work, delivering that in the context of a workshop where people are learning. There's an educational element here. It's like, what would happen if you went into a well-run workplace workshop training. People are going to talk to each other. They're going to discuss ideas. They're going to do activities. And these are all educational activities that are having a dual purpose. They're understanding the theoretical function of mindfulness in many aspects, not just in its stress reduction, but in how it enables people to create cohesive, inclusive, adaptive, high-performing teams. But those conversations and those activities are creating the conditions for social mindfulness, because they are creating interest, developing listening skills, developing the skills to describe experience, developing the language to describe experience, developing the skills to listen without trying to give people advice and tell them what they should do or they shouldn't do, to bring curiosity into the relationship, to learn these skills through the workshops themselves. So it's doing both the theory and the experience through the workshop, which is what a good workshop training should involve. Beautiful. And then it's using short mindfulness meditations as the practical element of the self-inquiry, the self-regulation, the communication elements as the interpersonal emotional regulation systems, and explaining why these two things interact. So the self-regulation and the interpersonal regulation, how they create, in a sense, the mind of the team that begins to function by listening to different opinions, not necessarily trying to get it all right all the time, understanding that that different perspectives are perhaps equally valid at different times. In the end, we have to choose one, but it doesn't mean it is the absolute right one that is fixed and true forever. It's just the one that we agree to follow for the time being, because it seems to make most sense. It's beginning to develop quite a deep philosophical understanding of the nature of things, from understanding how the way we think, if you like, it's developing a theory of knowledge as well in the workplace, as over and to help people understand what they are actually doing with technical solution type related skills in a social process, and making it as explicit as possible that this is what you're doing when you're telling people that you're teaching them to do it. You're not kind of like guru sitting there oozing some kind of magical wisdom that they can pick up. You're not trying to get them to, in a therapeutic context, you're asking the therapy, the client or whatever, to transfer some agency to the therapist, and that the therapist takes responsibility for that, to enable you, and you trust you're blindfolded, and the therapist is going to help you put it right. It's not saying anything. I'm trying to create full autonomy here. I'm telling you how this works, and I'm giving you the opportunity to learn how it works and empower you to use this to change the culture in your teams.
Well, that's a big mission. That's a big vision. So if a coach is hearing this and they're interested, or anyone is hearing this and they're interested in learning more about your work and what you're doing, how would they connect?
Well, I guess the first thing is to, check out socialmindfulness.net, which is trying to kind of put this together in a wider picture, trying to build this new stage in what I'm doing. Yes, there are contact forms on that you can contact me through socialmindfulness.net. My corporate, my business website is mindfulnessconnected.com, which is really, in the process of being reformed to really just support socialmindfulness.net. So I guess the next big stage is really this developing this international team, beginning to train people internationally, and build a network that is disseminating the ideas. I've got a couple of, hopeful things in the pipeline that will kickstart me. I'm really looking for, seed funding to get this going, and some initial, to build an organization to organize all of this training stuff, because I can't do it all myself, partly because
absolutely,
I really don't like doing all of that stuff.
Well, right, exactly. I mean, a lot of us are in the same boat,
but partly because it's a complete waste of my energy to do all of that.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's kind of like why you have more important things to be doing, but that's got to be done too, right? Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm looking for collaborators, really.
There you go. And you need a community of folk to pull this off. And that's why I'm talking to you, because, to what little degree the Mindful Coach Association can help further and amplify your work, that's available to you as a resource. And then the people who are listening to this, reach out, connect with Mark, get in touch with him, stay in, watch his feeds. He's always putting out great stuff on LinkedIn and other places.
Yeah. Connect with me on LinkedIn too. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, thank you so much for having such a big vision and for sounding the alarm in a way, like this matters and it's important. And people need to be it can't be business as usual for the next 50 years. It's got to be something different. And I really appreciate your work in that regard.
Oh, thank you, Brett. And it's pleasure to whatever, shoot the crap with you.
Yeah, we're shooting crap.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, my experience with you is it's always you just go so deep with this content, and you have such a big intellectual cognitive facility, as well as an experience base and a capacity to put this together in a way that sort of like, I feel like you're like, you're trying to describe a vision that is so big that it doesn't even fit into words. And so it's kind of, it's a struggle it's almost like, the metaphor about all the 10 blind men with their hands on an elephant, it's a little bit like that. And in my conversations with you over the last several years, I think I'm getting a sense of the elephant, and you're always saying there's an elephant here.
In the end, reality, you can't put it into words. I mean, even the word reality isn't satisfactory because it suggests there's something
Precisely.
That isn't reality,
So thank you so much for your work and your mission and your vision. And let's do this again. I think we need to do another round of this at some point.
Oh, that'd be lovely. Yeah, but it's lovely to talk. Yeah.
Thank you now.
Take care.
And that's a wrap for this edition of the Mindful Coach Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this presentation. And if you did, follow us and leave us a review. If you're a coach or helping professional that values mindfulness in your work, browse over to mindfulcoachassociation.com and create a free community profile describing your services so the world can find you. And you'll be invited to exclusive community meetings where you can meet your colleague. I'm your host, Brett Hill, founder of the Mindful Coach Association, coach and coach trainer teaching the Mindful Coach method. You can find out more about me at themindfulcoach.com. Until next time, stay present.